Bolivia, Copacabana, La Paz, Yunga Road, San Pedro Prison, and Potosi. Republic of Bolivia, in honor of Simón Bolívar. At the Peruvian-Bolivian border, it would have been 50-50 whether we could have smuggled Ross across. It was a sort of desolate crossing, not a lot of chaos that would have offered distractions. Ross was a 6'1" white blonde guy. Immigration might have noticed that he didn't get processed as he mingled amongst the Peruvian men, whose average height was 5'2.63", the 12th shortest population in the world, just 0.03 inches taller than the Vietnamese. The island of Timor-Leste wins the shortest population, coming in at 5'1.28". Peru immigration was an easy stamp out. Exiting the building, you walked the distance of 2 football fields across the border to get your stamp into Bolivia. Back on the bus, nobody asked to check that you got your stamps. Not here, anyway. At least, not today. Copacabana. Copacabana was less than impressive. I expected more, but I really didn't know why. Nothing in the guidebook said anything exciting about the town. No backpacker ever mentioned to me how I really must go see Copacabana, Bolivia. No, the town sort of sat there on the shore of Lake Titicaca, wanting to be something. With a chip on its shoulder, it decided it didn't need to impress anyone. Lake Titicaca did that. "Why steal its thunder?" said the town to the gringo. Rachel was meeting someone, a friend. After asking to join her, I decided that I would do my own thing and meet her in a couple of days. I wanted to be alone and found a room for $1.75. I got them down to $1.45. It offered a cold concrete floor and dirty gray stucco walls with a single bed and a 50-watt light bulb hung from a wire with a string. Shared toilet and shower. In this town, you could just piss in the alley and no one would give you 2 looks. Shitting in the street was not uncommon, as I witnessed men doing it throughout South America. A restaurant near the beach offered only one meal, trout and rice, for $1.25. For an additional 25 cents, I added a bottle of Patagonia beer. I suppose I could have haggled the price a bit. It seemed like I was the only customer around that day, but I was already up 30 cents on the room. Trout? In the 1930s, at the request of the Peruvian and Bolivian governments, trout was brought in from the United States for economic purposes. The whole thing backfired, and now trout was one of the most invasive species in southern Peru. I sat outside on a fold-out chair and at a card table with my meal, looking at Lake Titicaca. I would be remiss not to share with you some of the overly stated statistics about Lake Titicaca, so I'll punch list this. 1. The largest lake in South America. 2. The highest navigable lake in the world. And 3. The birthplace of the Inca, and where their spirits return after death. Yampupata was about a 10-mile hike that would take me about 4 hours. From there, the plan was to find someone to take me to Isla del Sol. I assumed finding someone to do this wouldn't be an issue. To be honest, I didn't want to pay the outrageous price of $10 USD to take the established ferry, or pay the rumored tax of $2.50 to step foot on the island. The hike gave me time to reflect about the trip thus far. The things, the people, the places, the adventures, and misadventures. Did Cory ever make it to Santiago? I thought about where my life was just 5 months ago, in a cubicle, working on red lines, reviewing shop drawings, and problem-solving subcontractor hiccups. A landlord, a homeowner. I was stressed, overworked, and putting in 70-hour weeks. Now, I was hiking along the coast of the highest navigable lake in the world, in the middle of the world's longest mountain range. I had seen the Nazca lines and unusual parades, the wonderful and interesting people I had met from all over the world, and I was just 1/3 the way down the continent of South America. What if I kept going after South America? There was Europe, Africa, Australia, Asia, all offering an impossible list of sights and sounds and smells and adventures. New lovers, new friends. Perhaps I would meet my wife while hiking the Gobi Desert. Everything was chance, random happenstances. 1 minute, I was sitting in a cubicle, and the next, I was haggling over a room in the Andes in a location of the world I never knew existed. Reader, I can honestly tell you, I didn't see any of this coming. About an hour into my hike, I met a young kid, maybe 13 or 14. His name was David. He spoke very good English and was hiking to see his grandma, who happened to live in the same direction I was headed. He asked me where I was from and wanted to practice his English. So we walked and talked. He pointed out all the coca and opium fields that surrounded us. We stopped at the Gruta de Lourdes, named after Bernadette Soubirous, who had visions of the Immaculate Conception. The Gruta de Lourdes was a less than obvious grotto tucked up into the side of the mountain. Had David not pointed it out, I would have missed the series of metal ladders that led to the statue, covered with simple gifts. At the base of the ladders was an altar where shamans performed their rituals, another weaving of the Catholic Church with ancestral beliefs. David told me how the god Viracocha came out of Lake Titicaca and created the world and the stars and the moon and the sun. Viracocha took a rock and made Manco Capac and Mama Ocllo, the first people in the world and from whom we all came. Sort of the Adam and Eve story with a different group of actors. David guided me off the road and onto a trail that involved some climbing. He pointed at the stone path we were walking on. Inca Trail. Inca Trail immediately transported one to Machu Picchu. But of course, it would make sense that Inca Trail crisscrossed all over the Andes. In fact, the Capac Ñan, as it was known in Quechua, covered over 25,000 miles of roads, including bridges, tunnels, and causeways. We reached David's grandmother's house and said goodbye. Down the road a bit, I met a guy who waved me over to his house and offered to show me his balsa. Balsas are boats made by tightly bundling reeds found along the shores of Lake Titicaca. The process goes back to the Uru people who predate the Inca. The Uru still live on approximately 120 islands made from reeds as their ancestors did before them. I had never heard of these floating islands before meeting my new friend, and I was fascinated. He then showed me how to use a sling, which was used to hunt or fend off animals to protect the owner's sheep and alpacas. About a half-mile down the road, I came across a couple from England with the same game plan I had in regards to getting to Isla del Sol. It didn't take much to find someone to take us. Several men approached us as we got closer to the beach. They all knew they could make a couple of dollars rowing us to the island, which was just shy of a mile away. We chose a boat and pushed off. Karen took us to an undesignated spot on the southeast side of the island and pointed to a path leading up the steep, rocky hillside through the terraced farmland. Karen, of course, is the boatman who ferries souls of the dead across the river Styx to Hades. Following the ridge, we found a small hamlet that offered a couple of hostels. I abandoned the English couple and found a room for $3. It was expensive, but I had very few options. The next day, I hiked the length of the island, along the high ridge amongst the rocks and eucalyptus trees, under the gray, cloudy sky overlooking the impressive lake. Reaching the Mesa Ceremonica, the ceremonial table, which sat in the shadow of the sacred rock. The Mesa Ceremonica was a bit shocking. I thought right away of human sacrifice and black magic. The large, thick, flat stone was empty, as if waiting for the next human to be strapped to its cold surface. Arms and legs tied and spread in opposing directions as the group chanted, and the shaman dropped the blade. The sun god appeased as the blood of the victim was consumed by the group, and the heart, still warm, was eaten by the shaman. I didn't know if any of that actually happened here, but that was where my mind went upon seeing the ceremonial table. The next day, I wandered down the Inca stairs to the port. I wasn't sure how I was going to get back across the lake. It turned out that if you were on the island, it was assumed you already paid the return fare, so no ticket was required to return on the established ferry I protested taking originally. Back in Copacabana, I ran into Rachel, who told me Ross had his new passport and was already in La Paz waiting for us. We bought bus tickets and headed out. An hour out of Copacabana, we arrived at the Strait of Tequina. No longer surprised by anything, when we approached the strait and noticed the road just ended into the water, my reaction was simply, huh. I was sure they got this figured out. Ruta Nacional 2 picked up on the other side of this half-mile waterway. We got off the bus and loaded onto a small passenger boat, which took us across. Along the beach were 20 to 30 floating docks. One pulled up to the water's edge, and we watched as the bus drove onto this makeshift barge. There were at least a half-dozen barges heading along both sides of the strait, loaded with buses, and cows, and cars, and trucks. Back on the bus, we reached La Paz just before sunset. The road to La Paz was brown and narrow, lined with random unfinished and uninteresting brown structures. Beyond the cathedrals and colonial architecture, La Paz was a huge city, and all in the shadow of Illimani, a mountain whose height reached 21,122 feet. La Paz was all new, but all the same. Short, graffiti-covered buildings with metal doors. Quechua women sat on sidewalks, while businessmen with poorly constructed suits walked between honking taxis, colectivos, and stray dogs. Garbage lined the streets, moving only when the wind instructed it. Ross had found us a hostel in the Belém district. Not sure what our next steps were, I found myself sort of complacent. Perhaps it was the gray sky and cool temperature that sort of reminded me of an endless dark fall week in the Midwest, preparation for winter hibernation. I didn't need to see or do anything, just move on to the next place or not move on. Stay still, stay quiet, stay hidden and unknown. I was tired of moving and change. Tired of never completely unloading my backpack to see what it was I even was carrying. Just 3 days in one place would break this funk. 3 days to unpack and repack. 3 days to not look for a place to stay, a bus to ride, a meal to eat. 3 days. Instead, I threw my pack on a dorm bed and went for a stroll, finding the Witches' Market. A sort of must-see place, according to Lonely Planet. The name was more interesting than the market itself, which was basically a couple of storefronts hosted by a couple of elderly women who sat in chairs waiting to be bothered. Offerings of figurines, aphrodisiac potions, dried herbs, and dried animals, such as snakes and turtles, covered tables filled with baskets and hung from hooks mounted to the ceiling. Then there were, of course, the famous llama fetuses. It was all stuff that could be found at Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo in New Orleans, sans Laveau's touristy offerings of coffee cups, key rings, and T-shirts. Wealthy Bolivians sacrificed living llamas to the goddess Pachamama, that is, Mother Earth, to protect their home. Poor Bolivians buried dried llama fetuses under their foundations. This witchcraft reminded me of a book I read in college, Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic Among the Azande by E. E. Evans Pritchard. The conclusion: primitive people had a pre-logical thought process. If you stubbed your toe or became sick, it wasn't because you were a klutz or just happened to catch a bug. It was because you had been cursed by someone, and only a witch doctor could reverse the curse. I bought myself an Inca cross. The next day, Rachel asked if I would go with her to the National Bolivian Police Academy. Not entirely clear to me how she pulled this off, but she told me we could get in and ride a couple of horses. I had just met Sarka the night before. She was from the Czech Republic, and I was now smitten with her. A tough decision had to be made. Hang out with Sarka all day and appease the woman I was currently smitten with, or ride horses of the Cuerpo de Policía Nacional at the National Bolivian Police Academy. The horse riding event was really controlled. We just trotted around a corral for 15 minutes. That was it. I'd love to tell you there was more to it. Perhaps I could share with you that we shot machine guns off the back of the horses as we galloped and jumped through minefields. But really, all we did was trot around a corral for 15 minutes, albeit we did this at the National Bolivian Police Academy. So I got that going for me, which is nice. Before leaving, I asked one of the officers if I could buy his hat. His supervisor wrote down an address where I could buy Bolivian police uniforms. I could get a hat there, which was exactly where we went next. I purchased a Bolivian police baseball cap and a badge, along with a formal policia hat with badge. The vendor selling these items to me didn't even blink an eye. Junga Road. 23 miles long and descending almost 8,500 feet, the Junga Road, a.k.a. Road of Death, Death Road, El Camino de la Muerte, had been christened the most dangerous road in the world. When I learned that one could ride a mountain bike down it, I cleared my calendar. For $25, I was given a helmet that was too small, a yellow safety vest, and a shitty, rusty mountain bike. The front suspension was seized, and the brakes, I would learn when trying to avoid going head-on into a truck, didn't really function. Aside from that, I joined a group of 7 others and led them down the road. Our leader yelled at me a couple of times for going too fast, but come on, it was the road of death. Drive fast, take chances, ride it like you stole it, and all that. It really was quite beautiful. Starting above the clouds, the road meanders through the lush foliage where small waterfalls occasionally drizzled water onto the road. When the exercise of descending really got nerve-wracking was when a truck, bus, or car would suddenly appear around a corner, requiring you to swerve toward the edge. Those were the most dangerous episodes of the descent. Aside from that, you just needed to be capable of keeping a bike on a 10-foot wide dirt road. I shouldn't have taken this lightly. 18 cyclists had died on this road since 1998, a small number considering the 300 motorists who died each year. It wasn't long before we entered the clouds and descended through them, ending at a little hostel in Coroico with a pool. Yes, I would say it was occasionally harrowing. Not being a fan of heights compounded that, but the truly frightening part of the day was when the shuttle drove us back up the Jungas Road, knowing full well other buses and trucks and cars were coming the other way. At first, I sat in my seat like a good boy, but after passing the first truck, I laid down on the floor of the colectivo with my eyes closed, wondering what death felt like when you plummeted from the side of a cliff in a small van. Carcel de San Pedro Prison. Quite possibly the strangest and most bizarre place I had been to on this journey. I approached a doorway, an arched vestibule. There sat a guard, who I presumed collected your passport. I had a copy of mine, not the original, which was sufficient. My guess was this helped prove you were a guest, not a prisoner, when trying to leave. The guard opened the gate, and, just like that, I was in the courtyard of San Pedro Prison. It was hard to wrap your head around this being a prison when you saw women hanging laundry out to dry and kids playing football. Women and children in a men's prison? Yep, the families lived together, waiting for the sentence to be served. There were no guards or police in the prison. The entire operation was run by the inmates. They had their own form of government inside the prison. They manufactured cocaine. One guy showed me his gun, and another a Crocodile Dundee-sized knife. Cells were sold, not assigned. The more money you had, the nicer cell you could afford. Had I been more on my game, I could have arranged to stay the night for $8, but those cells had been rented out for the night to other backpackers from Australia. The place left me conflicted. Part of me wanted to explore all the nooks and crannies, talk to any of the prisoners who spoke English, and get a better understanding of life in the prison. The other part of me wanted to get the fuck out of there. I was beginning to doubt that a simple copy of my passport would be my key out of this place. It was my last night with Sarka. She had a terrible cold, so we talked and drank coca tea. She went to bed early, and I went out, found a street vendor, and tried one of the local favorites, cuy, on a stick, which is guinea pig. I never saw Sarka again. Potosi. Potosi claims to be the highest city in the world, at 13,420 feet. It's not. That honor is held by the city of La Rinconada, Peru. Potosi falls somewhere in the teens. The night bus to Potosi was a long, slow journey across Bolivia's Altiplano. Headlights turned off in an effort to save gas, I suppose. The person next to me was a big fella. We spent the entire night passive-aggressively trying to take ownership of the middle armrest while both pretending to be asleep. It ended in a tie. In Potosi, it was early morning, perhaps 7 a.m. I missed my watch and made a note to pick up a new one down the road. Finding a food market, Ross, Rachel, and I had breakfast with the locals and came up with a simple game plan. First, find rooms. Then, head to the mines at Cerro Rico, Rich Mountain. There were times I had to get over my anti-tour elitism. To visit the mines at Cerro Rico, I had to suck it up and pay the $10. It was recommended that we also bring gifts of coca leaves, cigarettes, and dynamite to the miners, which could be found in the shops along the way to the mine. Turned out, you could buy dynamite for $1 a stick. I had no clue if that was a deal or not, but it was shocking to think that one could just enter a shop and buy sticks of dynamite. Then again, I just bought a Bolivian police cap with a badge. As we approached, our guide told us that about 10,000 men, women, and children work in the mines. 8 million had died in the mines since they opened because of the lack of oxygen in the tunnels, the dust from explosions, and smoking unfiltered cigarettes. Average life expectancy of a mine worker was 40 years old. Eduardo Galeano wrote in his book, Open Veins of Latin America, you could build a silver bridge from Potosi to Madrid, Spain, from what was mined there, and one back with the bones of those that died taking it out. We were given hard hats with lamps, rubber boots, yellow rain suit overalls, and heavy windbreakers, then marched into the darkness. If you are claustrophobic, have a fear of the dark, or just have a strong urge to live, skip this tour. 3 of the Australians with us hightailed it out of there in less than 5 minutes. The opening was tall, but the passage quickly narrowed and the walls closed in. There was no rhyme or reason to the layout of the honeycomb of passageways. They went up and down rickety wood ladders, they went left and right and sideways. What would a cross-section of this look like? Perhaps an ant farm. Pipes bringing in compressed air hissed around us. Our guide brought us to a statue of the devil. The miners believed God should be worshipped when above ground, but the devil was the lord of the underworld, the mines below. So they brought him gifts daily to show respect. On August 1st, llamas were slaughtered in a ritual sacrifice, and their blood smeared on the equipment and entrance of the mine. The heart was then placed at the feet of the devil, and he was given a day to enjoy his feast. Interesting stuff. I sat in a cramped tunnel watching a guy hit a chisel with a hammer for 10 minutes. He did this all day, every day. At one point, we turned off our headlamps and sat in the darkest darkness. Remote sounds of metal hitting rock, echoed around the labyrinth of tunnels. On the way out, I helped a young kid, maybe 12, push a wheelbarrow of rocks out of the mine. I took my helmet off and watched as he dumped the rocks and went back into the darkness for more rocks. When I was 12, I was learning algebra. He was entering and exiting a small opening in a mountain in the Bolivian high plains. One day, he'd graduate from removing rocks with a wheelbarrow to chiseling them until the day he died in roughly 28 years, statistically speaking. Keeping a couple of sticks of dynamite for ourselves, Ross and I decided to light the fuses and throw them into an empty landscape. Quite an explosive experience. This would be our last day together. Ross and Rachel would head back to La Paz to meet their parents, then return to the United States. I heard Ross went and joined the United States Army, and Rachel, who had been on a 3-month leave of absence, went back to her job as a smoke jumper. On the bus to Arica, I cracked open a newly acquired book from the hostel, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It was a fast, short read with a captivating and simple story that pulled me in. The only time I stopped to enjoy the outside world was when we passed the dormant volcano Nevado del Sahama. The highest point in Bolivia, at 21,463 feet, the white-capped volcano stood guard.